Violence begins with the moment of judgment we have in our mind against either ourselves or others. It then extends out into the world as actions and thoughts that continue that judgment and blame until physical violence is reached. We feel like total victims in this world, but our state of consciousness is entirely tied to what we experience. Our external experience is happening inside our own mind, and violence is just the way in which our mind is evoking painful feelings within us. We feel that the ultimate issue we're dealing with is that the physical world is our problem and we need to escape it, or at very least to cope with it. However, the physical world is not something you can really cope with. It's a place of pain where no one really gets what they want, and violence and frustration runs through everything that we experience here. Some people squat on piles of billions of dollars while other people starve to death, and in between everyone is fighting and clawing their way up a pile of limited resources in an attempt to get what they want. So violence is inherently built into the system of physicality. However, our state of mind is completely tied into our seemingly external experience of life. The two go hand in hand, and there's no way to escape our internal state through external actions only. We place our value on judgment, on the process of judging against others and blaming and hating ourselves, and guilt. And that value that we give to judgment is then extended to all forms of violence, hatred, and anger that seem to extend from the judgments that we make. Physical violence is obvious. Mental and emotional violence can range anywhere from the daily cruelties that we have to endure on the job or at home to emotional and verbal abuse from people we're in relationships with. But beyond that, there's the more uncharted areas of cruelty, the places that we're not quite as conscious of, that are inherent in our lives as sort of a subtext, as a background noise or underlying message behind many of the things we see when we're watching TV or listening to the radio or reading the newspaper. It's even on the internet. Even more subtle is the violence in our thoughts, either about ourselves or others, that go on untracked in our mind as sort of a background noise to our lives. This mental violence is closer to the source of all violence, our own judgment, than the physical forms of violence. In analyzing our violent judgmental thoughts, our anger, self-hatred, guilt, and feelings of victimization, we can trace them all back to the source of judgment within our own mind. Violence against others, whether mental or physical, is in the form of blame, judgment, anger, rage, indignation, or physical violence, is always a source of new guilt for us to deal with. All these states increase our guilt, and that guilt then produces more violence in our mind that expresses itself as external events and internal mental and emotional suffering. We're not pieces of meat, and violence wants to make us feel as if we are. We're entirely made of consciousness. We are our own mind, and the world that we see is an extension of this mind. We all see the same world because we are all expressions of one ultimate mind, and therefore our minds are synchronized to share a single seemingly consistent illusion, which is the physical world. In a dream state, you see a physical world around you, and you interact with that world and treat it as if it was real. You have an identity that's specific to that world, and in the dream, you're not the same person you are exactly as you are when you're awake. So you're defined by your environment in the dream world. You treat the dream world as if it's real, and you interact with it in a way that induces emotions like pain and fear and anxiety and anger and so forth. And the feelings that are evoked by the dream through what you experience physically in the dream, by what seems to come at you from the physical world in your dream, is the same dynamic that you're experiencing in the physical world here. where things seem to happen outside of yourself, but in reality everything is happening inside your own mind, and it's all an expression of an internal process of thought that's going on in your mind. Violence and judgment drives us deeper and deeper into objectification. We become bodies instead of minds, and we experience the pain, humiliation, fear, powerlessness, and hopelessness of becoming pieces of meat in a dead world without the possibility of redemption. But absence of judgment, the opposite direction, leads us towards the release of rage and blame, to seeing ourselves as minds rather than bodies, and releasing us from the pain and the decisions that lead us to more pain, and increases our degree of love. In other words, it moves in the opposite direction, away from objectification and violence, and towards love, internal peace, happiness, and the removal of everything that brings us pain and violence. Violence as entertainment is satisfying on one level, but leads to disturbance of mind on the other. Even virtual violence leads to feelings of guilt, anger, and pain. Our mind is drawn to violent entertainment out of a need to vent the incredible amount of frustration and pain we feel from living in this world. But at the same time, because the cause of violence is only being reinforced by that kind of entertainment, and the cause being, of course, blame, then in our mind, the force that causes and perpetuates suffering, this blame and anger and judgment, is only increased, and we are locked into an addiction to what is actually hurting us. A mind locked into violence sees the world as a hopeless, bitter place and sees no hope for itself or others. But through a process of gradual release from judgment against oneself and others, you can experience movement in a different direction and the gradual release from internal violence. Against what seems to be overwhelming odds and insurmountable obstacles, we can find not only peace of mind, but also release ourselves from anger and self-hatred, and even come into a state of unconditional love. And we can even find faith. No one can lead you to that conclusion. You either choose it willingly or you can't go at all. You can insist that it's impossible, but that assertion is only built on your own ignorance. You haven't made the journey, so you really can't intelligently comment on it. You can insist that your take on reality is the only logical one, but ultimately every person will face the point where they feel the need to make that journey because the pain of the world is so overwhelming that we all ultimately need to find a better way of living. We need to escape the source of violence in our life before it utterly and totally destroys us. And the world is only getting more desperate and violent by the day. Every day it's teetering more and more towards the edge of collapse. Now is the time to shed hatred and to seek love before there's no more time left. And just as a cracked bowl won't hold water, we can honestly say that if love is not in our mind and our mind is filled with violence and hatred, then we're not going to be able to understand love or hold the experience of it in our mind. We're not going to be able to embody it. We have to make a gradual healing shift in our thought process in order to be able to love and to understand love sufficiently to embody it. We may see no solution to our outward problems, but if we make the inner journey, then the consciousness that is within us, beyond our conscious mind, the superconscious source that we came from, will support us and help us fully in our decision and will make it possible to make that journey successfully. Along the way, we might have to pass through incredible pain, suffering, and difficulties, but the floor will not fall out from under us. We will be supported, and eventually we'll reach a safer shore and a better quality of life. We only need to make a daily commitment to ourselves to move in the direction away from hatred, guilt and judgment, anger and violence. The benefit is that we begin to experience ourselves beyond self-hatred and the hatred of others. We start to experience a loving self made of consciousness rather than seeing ourselves as a piece of meat. This is a remarkable journey into self-knowledge, self-awareness, and peace. I hope you make it. Thank you.